Hey guys, it's Danny. Today, I need to do some ICU setups for some very sickly orchids. And I thought it would be a great idea to take you guys along since you might have noticed I don't usually do these setups way too often. Ever since I made that video on them, you didn't really see me do them. And well, that's because I actually prefer to place orchids in their quote-unquote forever home directly, not to put them through this intermediary stage if they really don't need to. It's just another acclimation step. But there are some cases in which some of these orchids really need a little bit of help. So today I'm going to tell you how I differentiate between these orchids and how I decide which ones need the ICU, which ones don't. And of course I do have some orchids to put in these little setups, which are not complicated at all. They sound complicated, but they're not. It's just how I call them. So I hope you'll find this video interesting and helpful. And before we start, don't forget to give it a like if you really enjoyed it and you found it useful. And hey, why not subscribe? I post multiple times a week. Righty then, so let me show you a few orchids that are already rehabilitating. And here they are next to my beautiful Schilleriana for moral support. As you can see, these are some orchids that I don't have in pots. I actually have them on a bed of sphagnum moss, typically in a different container. And well, if you've watched my initial video on my ICU setups, I really didn't change much ever since then. It's basically a little jar with some damp sphagnum moss at the bottom. I sit the orchid on the moss, I don't plant it in any way, and hey presto, you have the ICU. See, I told you it was easy. I also like to put them in different containers, separated from the other orchids, just so I see them, I have them in mind. I make sure that moss is always constantly damp. It's really easy to lose track of things in my plant room, so having them, as you see in this little aquarium, really helps me out. Now, why do I do this? Well, it's because their roots simply refuse to grow. They do sprout. Every orchid will sprout roots if it's the right season, so there is no need for growth hormones and other boosters that I personally don't use anyway. But really, there is no need for that. They sprout roots. The problem is the roots dry. Because they're a little bit fragile due to the fact that these orchids might be already dehydrated or stressed in some way, and they don't have a lot of energy. So they sprout the roots, but the roots don't have the power to grow into the pot due to the lack of humidity. Now, in my grow room, I could have 60% humidity and it would still not be enough for these roots. They need constant moisture very close to them, so they start to rehydrate the orchid. The more they rehydrate the orchid, the more energy the orchid will have, the more strength they will have to put into roots. It's one depends on the other. One cannot do without the other. So obviously, if in their pots the roots simply don't have the humidity necessary to hydrate themselves, right, they will just dry. So I need to put them on something very moist. And what material is best at keeping things moist? It's sphagnum moss. Now at some point these roots will grow and the orchids will become stronger and rehydrated and full of energy, and at that point I can safely put them in their forever pots. But right now it is not the time, and if I don't do this setup, I can actually lose the orchids due to the lack of energy and the lack of moisture that the roots needed. So I hope you understand why I do these setups. And the reverse is, some orchids really are not super dehydrated, or they have good reserves that they don't actually start to lose root length. Most often than not, Phalaenopsis don't go in ICUs. There are obviously exceptions, but if you remember my Orchid Care for Beginners episode, when I do actually save some dehydrated and almost rootless orchids, not even then did I put them in an ICU. And well, 99% of the times Phalaenopsis are very strong, so even if they're sickly, I put them directly in their forever home and they just start to grow without any type of issue. By the way, this is the orchid that we repotted recently. It's the one I burned the leaves of with window cleaner, and she is doing great. Look at this new leaf. So if you remember, we were only left with this leaf fully grown, and this was enough to provide energy. If I see I have issues with the Phalaenopsis as well, which sometimes it happens, I will consider an ICU. Generally though, I don't, and this goes for any orchid which has enough strength to push those roots into the pot and not stop growing them. But some are just not, such as this little Cattleya, which is my Hawaiian Splash Leia. Now, there are various reasons why an orchid might not have enough energy to grow those roots vigorously. It can start with dehydration, root loss, and all of those fun stuff that can happen to orchids, but also it depends on its history. The more an orchid stays stressed and set back, the more it is likely to take a lot of time to bounce back and just be more fragile in general. Also, other ailments such as fusarium or viruses can play a role as well. Typically, virus orchids are really weak to the point that not even an ICU can help them out. And those orchids are typically discarded, but sometimes just a bad case of bad history can be the answer. And here I have my lovely Bonnie Vasquez. It has spent years just in limbo, or at least that's how it appeared before it actually started to take off. So I had to really care for it for a couple of years without seeing any major improvement or result. And then at some point, I guess when the reserves were high enough, she just took off, which is a little weird since I told you Phalaenopsis don't really have issues, they're strong. Well, especially with polychilous hybrids, sometimes things can go south. So ever since I purchased it, it didn't do well. And then all of a sudden, after a couple of years of trying to pamper it and treat it right, look at it. It is cured. So with orchids, you never know. Sometimes we just need to pamper these orchids, and that's exactly what I'm gonna do with the Hawaiian Splashlea, which is my oldest cattleya, 9 years at this point, and this is what I have to show for. Pretty sad, right? Well, I'm hoping to do it justice. Okay, so today we're using this tray, which is a lid from a container. I misplaced my tray. I did some aquarium work these past few days, and I used it there, and I misplaced it. I cannot find it. Can you believe that? Where do they go? I don't know. So what I'm gonna do is unpot this orchid. I do have some dead roots here that I need to remove. One of them just fell off. And yeah, judging by the smell, it's not good. So you can see there aren't really many roots to support the growth of the new roots. And whatever good root I have on this orchid is not long enough to reach the moist levels. I like to keep the top of my pots pretty dry to avoid algae. Right, so another thing I wanted to mention to you today, I'm running into an issue that I did not foresee. So as you know, I have grow lights now, and many of my orchids grow under the grow lights. Since my room is really not very naturally lit, you know, that word that I invented. Yeah, well, because the grow light comes from above, the pot has more light inside the decorative pot. Decorative pots protect from algae by shading the actual orchid pot. Well, if the light comes from above and there is space there, the light bounces off of the decorative pot into the actual orchid pot, and I get algae. I get more algae than before. And the thing is, I have some pots which are pretty full of algae and the roots are suffering. They're starting to die off. Not nice, not good. I have a fix for that. We're gonna talk about it in a different video, but yeah, there you go. I did not expect that. So some of the orchids that I will have to address are sickly because of the algae and cyanobacteria and just the excess of their byproducts. Right, so here we are. I cut away all of the dead roots. I am also tempted to remove this growth, but I'm gonna leave it because it can actually serve as a nutrient supply for the newer growth. When the roots grow, I definitely will remove this because it's already yellowing. It's not gonna hang on too much, but for now it is needed. One thing that I would like to do is remove these sheaths just to make sure I don't have any pests hiding in here. The last thing a sickly orchid needs is pests. And there we have it. I want to bring you closer just so you see how these roots are looking like. There we are. Can we see they just stopped growing? Some of you might say, oh no, they're burned. They're actually not burned. There is a very slight difference between burnt root tips and tips that just did not have enough moisture. They're not blackened enough, and also you can see the tip is starting to regrow. Whenever the tip is starting to regrow from the end point, you don't have a burn there, you just have some sort of damage. And dry air can cause damage. Burned roots, they end in a very fine black-like thread, and there's really nothing that will sprout from there. Those are truly burned roots. These are not burned, they're just damaged. It's really easy to get fooled into thinking you are burning them somehow, when in fact, they just did not have enough moisture. I just noticed another dead root here. And yeah, except for this root, there's no other root on my orchid. Pretty sad, right? Well, the way that I will do an ICU is by finding a container. It can be one of these one-time use plastic cups, which of course there will not be one-time use. I've had these for 4 years at this point. And I didn't go through the bag because I keep reusing the ones that I have. As long as you don't keep them in the sun, they are perfectly fine. But for this one, I think that jar is a little bit too deep. Maybe she would sit better here. Let's just make a little test. Why not? Or actually, maybe it is better. Alrighty, I'm gonna use this one. And what I will do is just place sphagnum moss at the bottom. It's fairly dry right now, but it's okay. We're gonna wet it. And look at that, perfect fit. Yeah. This little jar is better. Right, now we need to water it. What I like to use is only reverse osmosis water. No fertilizer, no tap water added. Usually for my orchids, I combine my reverse osmosis water with tap water just to save up a little bit, and also because they can handle it, but I don't want anything happening to these roots. So only reverse osmosis water and no fertilizer. So all I will do is just pour a little bit of water here. It doesn't matter to make it even, because the moss will just absorb water from any side of this pot and distribute it evenly. That's why I love sphagnum moss. And that's about it. Now you might ask, why don't I use fertilizer since this orchid needs energy? Well, the risk is higher than the benefit. The orchid already has stored nutrients. We're not gonna see abundant growth all of a sudden, not even if we fertilize, not even if we do the boosting hormone treatments. Nothing can perform miracles. And you do have to remember that no matter what you see written on a bottle, it's not a bottle of miracles. Things have a logic. So the new roots will utilize whatever energy these leaves will produce, because they will photosynthesize. Not full capacity, but enough to grow some roots. Not enough to bloom, not enough to look glorious and big, right? But enough to create some roots. If I would add fertilizer, and the roots obviously would not absorb all of it, I would just create buildup. And buildup can burn root tips. And if we burn the new root tips, it's pretty much game over. There is a limit to this orchid's energy. There is a limit to the space available for the roots to grow. So let's not risk it. Let's take things step by step. Let things run their course. We are not looking for miracles. It doesn't work that way. With any plant, really, things have a course, right? So this orchid is pretty much done. Maybe I should put just a little bit more water because I have quite a bit of sphagnum moss here since this orchid is tall. Alrighty, so I'm gonna put it in my little aquarium and I'm gonna show you a few other very sickly orchids that I have that I would definitely do the ICU treatment, and I will, maybe off camera, but I'll show you which orchids need it. So here I have two more sickly orchids. This is my Iwanagaara. Oh my goodness, can you believe it? I'm looking for a replacement. I don't know what happened to this one. It just suddenly collapsed. I have rot going down here. I need to separate this cane and you can see the roots are struggling to grow. They need some help. So what I'm gonna do is separate the pseudobulb and put this orchid in an ICU in a little jar and hope for the best, but I don't know, maybe there is an ailment that I'm not seeing on this one. And also here, again, I'm looking for a replacement for this one. It's my Siamese doll kiwi, and all of a sudden it is growing very, very, very tiny growths. Even though you can see there are roots spreading, I definitely would consider putting this in an ICU as well, because all of a sudden these growths can stop growing. I don't know what's wrong with it. I don't know when it's gonna deplete. You can see most of them are not long enough to reach the substrate, and I don't know if at some point they will just stop growing. So these two I will definitely consider an ICU setup for. Whereas for this, I absolutely did not consider an ICU setup. Do we remember, this is my orchid, my cattleya, that was getting dehydrated due to the fact that the roots were just not growing inside the pot. And we did a video for it. I repotted it a little bit differently, and look at it. Now, this one, I already was seeing she is vigorous, but the roots stopped growing due to the dryness. Nothing else. There is no ailment with this orchid. There is no pest, nothing that would warrant an ICU. There was also quite a lot of energy on the orchid, stored. And yeah, chances were that this one would do great if I would just direct those roots, which were kind of like this, so pretty long, if I only directed them towards the moisture. And look at her today. Can you believe it? When did we do that repot? A month and a half ago. I'll link you to the video down below. Look at it. I mean, there's really no need to hassle with the ICU. But this comes with observation. I'm already observing those orchids struggle, right? I didn't just wake up with the idea that, hey, I need to put those in the ICU because I say so. No, I observed them. It's easy to tell they weren't doing great. It was easy to tell with this one that she was strong. So it's not magic, and I don't have this secret knowledge that you don't. It's just experience, that's all it is. And I have experience with those orchids. And just for the funsies, let's end this video with the Iwanagaara as well. I'll show you really quick what I'm gonna do for it. To sanitize my cutting tools really fast. Okay, so there is no live root on this one. I'm just going to cut this pseudobulb at the rhizome level, right here. There we go. I will discard this part completely and keep only the pseudobulb, which already has some roots, but they do not want to grow. I see a new growth too, but they don't want to grow. So hopefully the higher humidity setup will make these roots grow, but honestly, this one I have major doubts, like major doubts. But again, same type of thing. Some sphagnum moss at the bottom. I don't need a lot, really I don't for this one. Drop this directly on the sphagnum moss, like so, and wet the sphagnum moss. And that's it, it's gonna absorb that water. No worries. That is it. I'm gonna put it in the aquarium as well. Easy peasy. And here is my ICU at the moment. So not only are the roots touching the moist sphagnum moss, but also around the roots, the humidity is much, much higher. Sphagnum moss also dries pretty fast. Yeah, I know, shocker. But because of the structure of it, because it has so much exposed surface, pretty much it is very, very prone to drying out and promoting evaporation, which means higher humidity in the area of the roots. And especially in the jars, you can have quite higher humidity right here than you have everywhere else. So I don't need to put globes or cloches on top of these orchids. I typically find that that promotes a little bit of mold on my orchids in my climate. So the aquarium is open top, but in the close vicinity of the orchid, I have higher humidity while still having ventilation. And that's what I'm looking for. And that is my setup explained. It's really no big deal. And if you still think you need to understand more how things work, I will also link you down below to the video that I made in which I talk about how I promote roots, again, without boosters and things of the sorts, because I just don't believe in them. If you do, hey, you do you. Don't listen to me, but I personally don't. And I've saved all of my orchids without boosters. So check that video down below. It only has to do with logic. That's all I use. That's my main weapon, my logic. And that's it. All I want is more humidity and ventilation at the same time than, you know, what my shelves provide. That is the very, very simplified version of it. And with that said, thank you so much for watching. Hope this inspires you and I hope it helps you out. Let me know if you did manage to save orchids with something like this. Let me know your stories down below. And with that said, I hope you have a great weekend. If you want to keep in touch with me on other social media, just search for me. I am at MissOrchidGirl everywhere. Check out my shorts channel. Sometimes I do shorter versions of these videos and other short stuff. But most importantly, do subscribe to this channel since it's my main outlet and I do my very best videos on this channel. So with that said, I'll see you next time. Bye.